The morning of June 7th, 1944, somewhere between the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy and the hedgerow maze that would consume the next 6 weeks, a German intelligence officer stands in a fortified bunker near Saint-Lô, examining grainy reconnaissance photographs of the Allied invasion fleet. Among the images, something catches his attention. Hundreds of strange hybrid vehicles rolling off landing craft, half truck, half tank, boxy steel bodies mounted on tracks and wheels. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. He'd seen reports about these machines, American M3 half-tracks. The Wehrmacht intelligence briefings from 1942 had been dismissive. Simple construction, thin armor, open tops that left crews exposed to shrapnel and weather. The consensus among German officers had been clear. These were crude compromises, inferior to Germany's own Sd.Kfz 251 half-tracks in every meaningful way: engineering quality, armor thickness, suspension sophistication. But now, watching them pour onto French soil in numbers that seemed impossible, the officer felt something unfamiliar, a cold knot of uncertainty settling in his stomach, because there were so many of them. And they kept coming. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of the American half-track's triumph in France isn't about technical superiority. It's about the collision between German tactical brilliance and American industrial might, between craftsmanship and mass production, between making the perfect machine and making enough machines. And in the summer of 1944, as Allied forces prepared to break out from the Normandy beachhead, that collision was about to reshape the entire campaign. To understand what happened, in France, we need to go back to where this story really begins. Not on the beaches, but in the factories of Detroit and Cleveland, in the minds of American engineers who'd watched the German blitzkrieg tear through Poland and France and understood one fundamental truth. Modern warfare had changed. Tanks could punch through enemy lines, but only if infantry could keep pace. And infantry marching on foot, the way armies had moved for centuries, would never be fast enough. The M3 half-track emerged from this realization. Development started in 1939, standardized in 1940. The design philosophy was pure American pragmatism. Take a commercial truck chassis, add a track system to the rear for cross-country mobility, keep the front wheels for steering, armor it just enough to protect against small arms and shrapnel, power it with a Hercules JXD inline 6-cylinder engine producing 147 horsepower. Nothing fancy, nothing over-engineered, just good enough and simple enough to mass produce. The White Motor Company in Cleveland became the primary manufacturer, joined by Autocar and Diamond T. They used commercial components wherever possible. The transmission was a 4-speed manual with a 2-speed transfer case, 8 forward gears total. The tracks weren't metal links like tanks used, but rubber blocks vulcanized onto steel cable. Firestone developed them. Each track had 110 individual rubber blocks, 5 inches wide, designed to grip mud, sand, or snow. The beauty of rubber tracks was threefold. First, quieter than metal clanking on metal. Second, they lasted longer on paved roads without tearing up highways. Third, if damaged, crews could replace individual blocks in the field, instead of swapping entire assemblies. Pragmatic engineering at every level. Inside, the M3 could carry 12 men, driver and vehicle commander up front, 10 infantry soldiers in the cargo area, sitting on bench seats along each side, knees, almost touching, rifles held vertically. The armor scheme told you everything about American thinking. 12.7 millimeters on the front plate, angled at 30 degrees, just enough to stop rifle rounds and machine gun fire at most ranges. Side armor, 6.35 millimeters, barely enough to stop pistol rounds. The Germans would mock this as inadequate. They were right, but they missed the point. The point wasn't to make each half-track invincible. The point was to make 41,000 of them. By December 1941, when America entered the war, Production was ramping up fast. 500 half-tracks per month by mid-1942, 1,500 per month by 1943. The assembly lines in Detroit and Cleveland ran with ruthless efficiency. Total production topped 41,000 units across all variants by 1945. While Americans were designing for mass production, the Germans were obsessing over technical perfection. Their Sd.Kfz 251 represented a completely opposite philosophy. Every mechanical component engineered to the absolute limit. A Maybach engine designed specifically for tracked vehicles. A 7-speed pre-selector gearbox that was smoother and faster than American manual shifting when it worked, but required specialist mechanics and scarce parts when it broke. The German track system used metal links, exactly like tank tracks. They lasted forever and could handle incredible punishment. But they were loud, they chewed up pavement, and they required constant maintenance. The Germans accepted these trade-offs because metal tracks performed better in absolute worst conditions. Deep mud, heavy snow, extreme cold where rubber could crack. But here's where German engineering truly diverged. The interleaved road wheel system. 7 overlapping road wheels per side, arranged so wheels from opposite sides interlaced with each other. This distributed weight more evenly, reduced ground pressure, and gave an incredibly smooth ride. German soldiers who'd ridden in captured American half-tracks universally preferred their own Hanemags. The catch? Those interleaved wheels were a maintenance catastrophe. If an inner wheel broke, you had to remove multiple outer wheels first. Mud and snow packed between wheels and froze solid overnight. German crews spent hours every morning with hammers and blowtorches just getting wheels unstuck. Manufacturing complexity matched mechanical complexity. The Sd.Kfz 251 required roughly 3,000 hours of skilled labour to build in 1940 compared to about 800 hours for an M3. Germany produced approximately 15,500 Sd.Kfz 251s during the entire war. Impressive for their industrial situation, barely a third of American production. Quality versus quantity, embodied in steel and rubber. When Allied forces stormed ashore on June 6, 1944, the half-track was there from hour one. Some were specialized DD amphibious Shermans, but right behind them came standard M3 half-tracks, rumbling off landing craft onto bloody sand. At Omaha Beach, where American forces faced murderous fire from fortified positions, half-tracks provided immediate mobile cover. Infantry, pinned down by machine guns, rallied behind these steel boxes, using them as moving shields. Within days, thousands of half-tracks had landed across Normandy, forming the backbone of American mechanized infantry battalions. A standard armored infantry battalion in 1944 had 3 rifle companies, each with 3 platoons. 36 squads total, requiring 36 half-tracks plus command and support vehicles, roughly 50 half-tracks per battalion. But Normandy was where the Germans' assumptions started to crack, because the bocage, that dense maze of centuries-old hedgerows and sunken lanes, turned into a meat grinder. Progress measured in yards, not miles. Both sides bled heavily. And here's where the first German officers started noticing something unsettling. Every time they knocked out an American half-track, another one appeared. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. German after-action reports from June and July 1944 repeatedly noted the speed of American replacements. A unit that lost 40% of its vehicles in heavy fighting could be back at full strength within days. Meanwhile, German half-tracks once disabled were often abandoned. The Wehrmacht lacked fuel, spare parts, safe workshops. Mechanical breakdowns became permanent losses. The bocage fighting revealed the M3's greatest strength, which wasn't armor or firepower. It was reliability and repairability. American recovery crews worked tirelessly. They'd tow damaged half-tracks back to field maintenance units. Mechanics could swap engines, transmissions, track assemblies. Within 24 hours, vehicles knocked out in battle could be patched, rearmed, returned to the front. German intelligence officers watching this unfold started revising their assessments. One captured report from July stated, "American vehicles are mechanically inferior individually, but their logistical system ensures continuous replacement. Numbers allow them to absorb losses that would cripple a German battalion." Then came July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra. The breakout that changed everything. General Omar Bradley's plan was audacious. Concentrate overwhelming force at a single point in the German line near Saint-Lô. Carpet bomb the defences into oblivion, then punch through with infantry and armour before the Germans could recover. 1,500 bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives. The earth itself seemed to tear apart. German positions were obliterated, communications destroyed, morale shattered. And through that gap came the half-tracks. The mechanised infantry of the First Army poured through the breach. M3 half-tracks, carrying infantry squads, staying 50 to 100 yards behind Sherman tanks. The typical drill had evolved through bloody experience. Tanks would engage any resistance. Half-tracks would halt. Infantry would dismount and use the vehicles as cover. The whole process took maybe 15 seconds from first contact to boots on the ground. But now, with German defences collapsing, the pace changed. This wasn't grinding through hedgerows anymore. This was exploitation, pursuit, the kind of warfare the half-track was actually designed for: open country, sustained advance, mechanical endurance. German defenders, already reeling from the bombardment, now faced something they'd never encountered on the Western Front. True mechanized warfare at American scale. Not battalions, not regiments, divisions. Multiple armoured divisions, with their supporting mechanized infantry, all moving simultaneously. By August 1st, General George Patton's Third Army was activated and committed to the fight. More half-tracks, more mechanized infantry. The flood became a deluge. German commanders watched in growing horror as American columns bypassed strong points, cut off retreat routes, encircled entire formations. One German officer recorded in his diary, "They fight with machines, not men. Their machines never stop coming. We destroy one and 5 appear." The statistics from late July and August tell the story. Over the course of Operation Cobra and the subsequent breakout, American forces covered distances that should have been impossible, 20, 30, 40 miles in single days. Not just armour racing ahead, but infantry keeping pace, arriving ready to fight, not exhausted from marching. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By mid-August, the strategic situation had transformed completely. German forces in Normandy found themselves in a pocket around the town of Falaise. Canadian and Polish forces pressed from the north, American forces swung up from the south. The trap was closing, and everywhere there were half-tracks. M3S, carrying American infantry, M5S, supplied through Lend-Lease supporting Canadian units. They formed the mobile skeleton of the Allied advance. When tanks seized key terrain, half-tracks brought infantry to hold it. When resistance stiffened, infantry dismounted and cleared positions, while half-tracks provided supporting fire from their 50 caliber machine guns. The Falaise pocket became a killing ground. German forces attempting to escape faced artillery, air attack, and mechanized pursuit that never let up. Polish forces on Hill 262, Mont-Ormel, fought desperately to close the gap. Canadian infantry pushed toward Chambois. American units blocked escape routes to the south. The half-tracks' role in this operation was less dramatic than tanks but more fundamental. They were the connective tissue. They brought forward ammunition, evacuated wounded, repositioned infantry to plug gaps, maintained pressure on retreating Germans. Every hour, every day, without the dramatic appeal of tank duels but with grinding, relentless effectiveness. By August 21st, the pocket was sealed. Estimates vary, but approximately 50,000 German troops were captured or killed. Thousands more escaped, but they left behind virtually all their heavy equipment. Tanks, artillery, vehicles, abandoned for lack of fuel or destroyed by air attack. German after-action reports from survivors make for grim reading. They describe not tactical defeat but systemic collapse. The inability to move supplies forward, the impossibility of evacuating damaged vehicles, the constant pressure from Allied forces that never paused, never gave them time to regroup, and underlying all of it, the same observation repeated in report after report. The Americans simply had too many vehicles, too many half-tracks, bringing forward too many infantrymen, too quickly, too reliably. The advance from Normandy to the German border took 60 days. From August 1st to the end of September, American forces covered hundreds of miles. They liberated Paris on August 25th, crossed into Belgium in early September, reached the German frontier by mid-September. Throughout this advance, the half-track remained the workhorse. Units operating M3s logged tens of thousands of miles. Engines ran continuously for weeks. Tracks wore out and were replaced in the field. Crews performed maintenance during brief halts, often working through the night to keep vehicles operational. The contrast with German forces became stark. Wehrmacht units retreating through France were increasingly foot-mobile. Their own half-tracks had been lost in Normandy or abandoned for lack of fuel. They moved as quickly as men could march, which meant American mechanized units could encircle them, cut them off, force surrenders without major battles. By late September, the Great Pursuit slowed, not because of German resistance, primarily, but because Allied supply lines had stretched too far. Fuel and ammunition couldn't reach forward units fast enough. The pause gave Wehrmacht defenders time to establish new defensive lines. The war would drag on for another 7 months. But the campaign in France had proven something fundamental. The German officers who'd mocked American half-tracks in 1942 as crude boxes on tracks had been wrong. Not about the engineering quality. They were right that German half-tracks were more sophisticated, better armoured, smoother riding. They were wrong about what mattered, because in modern mechanized warfare, at the scale of the Western Front in 1944, reliability and quantity trumped individual perfection. The M3 half-track wasn't invincible. It was available. It was fixable, and there were always more of them. A German panzer grenadier captured near the German border was interrogated in late September. Asked about his experience facing American forces, his response was telling. He said the quality of German equipment remained superior. Their vehicles were better. Their tactics were sharper. But then he paused and added something that captured the entire story. Every morning we would destroy American vehicles. Every afternoon more would arrive. It was like fighting the ocean. You could push back a wave, but another would always come, and another, until you drowned. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The numbers bear this out. By the end of 1944, over 40,000 M3 and M5 half-tracks had been produced. The majority saw service in the European theatre. German production of the Sd.Kfz 251 never exceeded 15,500 across the entire war, but raw production numbers don't tell the complete story. What made American half-tracks decisive wasn't just that there were more of them. It was the entire system built around them. The supply chain that brought spare parts forward, the maintenance doctrine that emphasized field repairs, the training that taught crews to perform basic fixes themselves, the replacement pipeline that ensured damaged vehicles could be swapped out. German forces had no equivalent system. Their logistics prioritized tanks and artillery. Half-tracks were secondary, parts were scarce. Specialized mechanics were pulled back for more important vehicles. Once a German half-track broke down far from major workshops, it was often abandoned. The American approach treated half-tracks as consumable assets in the best possible sense, not disposable, but maintainable and replaceable. Loss of individual vehicles was expected, planned for, mitigated through rapid replacement. German doctrine still treated each vehicle as precious, irreplaceable. In the 60 days from Operation Cobra through the end of September, this philosophical difference played out across hundreds of miles. American mechanized infantry battalions maintained operational tempo that German forces couldn't match, not because American vehicles were better, but because American logistics ensured they stayed in the fight. Looking back from decades later, military historians point to the 1944 campaign in France as a watershed, not just in the obvious sense of defeating Germany in the West, but in proving the value of mechanization at scale. The half-track wasn't the most glamorous weapon system, it wasn't the most technically advanced, but it fundamentally changed how infantry fought. Before mechanized infantry, foot soldiers marched to battle. They arrived exhausted. They fought from positions they could reach on foot. Their mobility was measured in miles per day. After the half-track proved itself in France, infantry became as mobile as armor. They arrived fresh. They could exploit breakthroughs immediately. Their mobility was measured in dozens of miles per day. The Germans had pioneered mechanized infantry earlier in the war with their panzer grenadiers, but they never produced enough half-tracks to fully mechanize their forces. Most German infantry divisions remained foot-mobile throughout the war. The Americans, characteristically, looked at the German innovation and said, "We'll do that, but we'll do it for everyone." By 1944, American armored divisions were fully mechanized. Every infantry battalion had its half-tracks. The vehicles weren't perfect, but they were present, and that presence changed the fundamental nature of mechanized warfare. But to truly understand what the half-track accomplished in those 60 days, we need to look beyond the big picture. We need to examine the details. The mud. The maintenance. The men who lived inside these steel boxes and learned to love them despite their flaws. A typical day for an M3 crew in France looked something like this. Wake before dawn. Check the engine oil, transmission fluid, track tension. The rubber blocks wore constantly on French roads. Crews learned to spot damage before it became catastrophic. Replace a single block in the morning. Avoid replacing an entire track assembly in the afternoon. The Hercules engine was famously reliable, but it demanded attention. Oil changes every 500 miles. Air filter cleaning daily in dusty conditions. The fuel system was simple, which meant fewer things could break, but also meant crews had to be vigilant about contamination. Water in the fuel could stop an engine cold. Inside the crew compartment, space was at a premium. 10 infantrymen plus their equipment, ammunition, rations, personal gear. The bench seats ran along each side, and men learned to wedge themselves in positions that minimized the constant jarring from rough terrain. Sleeping was done sitting up, rifles cradled, heads lolling against the steel walls. The open top that German officers mocked as a weakness became oddly liberating in practice. Yes, it left crews exposed to overhead threats, shrapnel from artillery airbursts, grenades lobbed from second-story windows during urban fighting. But it also meant visibility. The squad leader could see what was happening around the vehicle, could coordinate with other half-tracks, could spot threats and opportunities. And when things went wrong, when a mine detonated or an anti-tank round punched through thin armor, that open top meant escape. Men could bail out in seconds. German half-tracks with their enclosed fighting compartments looked safer, but crews trapped inside burning vehicles told a different story. American infantry developed a love-hate relationship with their half-tracks. They cursed the thin armor that wouldn't stop an 88mm shell. They complained about the cold in winter, the heat in summer, the constant mechanical noise, the bone-jarring ride-over, rough ground. But they also recognized what the vehicles gave them. Mobility, protection from small arms, a mobile base that carried their ammunition and equipment, a 50-caliber machine gun that could suppress enemy positions. One sergeant from the 2nd Armored Division, interviewed years after the war, put it simply, the half-track wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe, but it got us where we needed to go, and most of the time, it brought us back. The maintenance crews deserve their own recognition in this story. These were the mechanics and recovery specialists who kept the fleet running. In the field, far from major depots, operating in mud and rain, under occasional enemy fire, they performed miracles of improvisation. The American maintenance philosophy emphasized organizational levels. Unit mechanics handled routine maintenance and minor repairs. Battalion maintenance companies tackled more complex work, swapping major components. Division and corps-level units could perform complete rebuilds. This layered approach meant most problems could be fixed close to the front lines. Compare this to German practice. Wehrmacht maintenance was more centralized. Specialized work required pulling vehicles back to dedicated workshops. The quality of repairs was often higher, but the time and distance involved meant vehicles spent longer out of action. And as the Allies pushed deeper into France, German workshops kept retreating, putting them further from the units that needed them. The rubber track system, initially questioned by some American officers, proved its worth in France. Yes, rubber wore faster than steel. But replacement was straightforward. Maintenance crews carried spare blocks. A trained team could replace damaged sections in under an hour. Steel tracks required specialized tools and more time. More importantly, rubber tracks reduced the maintenance burden on the entire vehicle. Less vibration meant less stress on the suspension. Quieter operation reduced crew fatigue. Better grip on paved roads reduced fuel consumption. These small advantages compounded over thousands of miles. By August, some M3s had logged over 2,000 miles since D-Day. 2 months of near-continuous operation. Engines rebuilt in the field, transmissions swapped, track assemblies replaced multiple times. But the vehicles kept moving, kept fighting. German mechanics, when they captured American half-tracks and examined them, were simultaneously impressed and dismissive. The construction was crude by their standards, bolted assemblies rather than precise fits, commercial components adapted for military use, but they had to admit the design's fundamental soundness. Everything could be fixed. Nothing required specialized knowledge beyond basic mechanical skill. One captured German maintenance officer, interrogated in September 1944, provided an assessment that would prove prophetic. He said American vehicles were built for their entire system. Logistics, maintenance, replacement doctrine, all integrated with the vehicle design. German vehicles were built to be superior machines, but the system to support them had broken down under the pressure of total war. The advance through France also highlighted the half-track's versatility. The M3 base model was just the beginning. The American military had developed dozens of variants, all sharing common components. M16 multiple gun motor carriages with quad 50 caliber machine guns for air defense. M21 mortar carriers. M3A1 with improved gun mounts. Each variant filled a specific role, but all could be maintained by the same mechanics, supplied from the same parts inventory. German forces faced a bewildering array of American vehicle types, but logistics officers noted with frustration that they all used similar engines, transmissions, and running gear. Destroying one type didn't necessarily teach you how to counter another, but capturing any American vehicle provided useful spare parts for others. The human cost of the advance shouldn't be forgotten. Half-tracks provided protection, but they weren't invulnerable. American casualties in mechanized infantry units were significant. Anti-tank weapons killed crews. Mines destroyed vehicles. Artillery caught columns in the open. But the alternative, infantry marching on foot, would have been far worse. The speed of the advance saved lives in an unexpected way. By maintaining momentum, American forces prevented German defenders from establishing strong defensive positions. Towns that might have required weeks of siege and bombardment were bypassed or captured quickly. The Wehrmacht simply couldn't establish a stable front line when American mechanized units kept appearing behind their positions. One particularly telling engagement occurred in late August near the Seine River. German forces were attempting to establish a defensive line to buy time for retreating units to cross. American half-tracks from the 4th Armored Division appeared on roads the Germans thought secure. Infantry dismounted, seized key bridges before they could be demolished, and held them against counterattacks until armor arrived. The operation succeeded because the half-tracks covered 60 miles in less than 12 hours, including multiple brief firefights, one hasty river crossing using a damaged but serviceable bridge, and continuous movement through the night. No footmobile force could have matched that pace. No German mechanized unit in France at that point had the fuel to attempt it. German officers watching American operations evolved in their assessments over the summer. Early reports from June focused on tactical details, individual unit performance, specific engagements, equipment comparisons. By August, the tone shifted. Reports started discussing systemic issues, American logistical superiority, industrial production advantages, the impossibility of matching their rate of vehicle replacement. One particularly insightful German intelligence assessment, captured after the war, dated from late August 1944. It analyzed American mechanized warfare not as a tactical problem, but as an operational challenge. The report concluded that defeating American forces required destroying their logistics infrastructure, not engaging their combat units. But with Allied air superiority making interdiction nearly impossible, the report offered no viable solutions. The psychological impact on German forces shouldn't be underestimated. Wehrmacht soldiers had been told repeatedly about German technical superiority. Their weapons were better, their training was superior, their tactical doctrine was more advanced. All of this was largely true, but it didn't matter when they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by sheer material superiority. Captured German soldiers from the Normandy campaign frequently mentioned American vehicles in interrogations. Not with respect for their quality, but with exhausted acknowledgement of their quantity. One soldier described watching an American mechanized column pass for 3 hours. Half-tracks, trucks, tanks, all moving steadily eastward. He said it looked less like a military force and more like a mechanical river. The liberation of Paris on August 25 marked a symbolic milestone. American mechanized units entered the city alongside Free French forces. M3 half-tracks rolled down the Champs-Élysées, carrying infantrymen who'd fought from Normandy to the capital. Parisians cheered, threw flowers, climbed onto the vehicles to embrace liberators. But for the crews, Paris was a brief pause. By August 27th, most units were already pushing east again. The war wasn't won. Germany still had to be defeated, and the advance had to continue while momentum remained. The pursuit to the German border revealed both the strengths and limits of American mechanized warfare. The half-tracks performed brilliantly. They covered distances, maintained operational tempo, kept infantry mobile. But they couldn't solve the fundamental problem of logistics. Every mile forward stretched supply lines. Fuel consumption for mechanized units was enormous. A single armored division required hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel per day. Multiply that by multiple divisions advancing on broad fronts, and the numbers became staggering. The ports in Normandy couldn't handle the volume. Captured French ports were damaged or still being cleared. By September, Patton's Third Army was running on fumes. Literally, units were rationed to minimal fuel allocations. Advances that should have taken days took weeks because vehicles sat immobile, waiting for fuel trucks. The great pursuit slowed, then stopped. The half-tracks, so effective in exploitation, became a liability in the pause. They consumed fuel just sitting in place. Engines had to run periodically to charge batteries, warm oil, maintain readiness. Infantry climbed out and found themselves in static positions again, the very situation mechanization was supposed to prevent. German defenders took advantage of the operational pause. They rushed reinforcements forward, established defensive positions along river lines and at border fortifications. By the time Allied logistics caught up and offensives resumed, the opportunity for a quick victory had passed. The war would grind on through a harsh winter and into the spring of 1945. But even as the advance stalled, the half-track had proven its value. In 60 days, from July 25th through late September, American mechanized forces covered more ground than anyone thought possible. They'd broken the German army in France, liberated vast territories, and reached positions that set up the final assault into Germany. The cost had been significant. Hundreds of half-tracks destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of casualties among mechanized infantry crews. Maintenance personnel worked themselves to exhaustion, keeping the fleet operational. But the alternative, attempting the same operations with foot-mobile infantry, would have been far bloodier and possibly impossible. Post-war analysis by military historians consistently highlights the 1944 French campaign as a watershed in mechanized warfare, not because of any single brilliant operation, but because of sustained operational tempo over extended distances. The half-track made this possible. It wasn't the star of the show. Tanks got the headlines. Air power got the glory. But the unglamorous M3, carrying infantry through mud and dust, made everything else work. The German mockery of 1942 seems almost poignant in retrospect. Yes, American half-tracks were crude. Yes, German vehicles were technically superior. But the Germans were playing a different game. They were optimizing individual vehicles. The Americans were optimizing a system. And in total war, systems beat individual excellence. The lesson extended beyond half-tracks to American military philosophy generally. The M4 Sherman tank wasn't as good as the Panther or Tiger. American fighters weren't dramatically superior to German aircraft. American artillery used different doctrine than German guns. But American forces won because they could put more of everything in the field, keep it supplied, replace losses, and maintain pressure. The half-track embodied this philosophy perfectly. Good enough mechanically, simple enough to produce in vast numbers, reliable enough to keep running under hard use, and supported by a logistics and maintenance system that treated vehicles as parts of a larger whole rather than as irreplaceable assets. One final comparison drives the point home. By the end of the war in Europe, in May 1945, American forces still operated thousands of M3 half-tracks. Many were the same vehicles that landed in Normandy, rebuilt, repaired, still functional. Had almost completely lost their mechanized capability. Surviving Sd.Kfz vehicles were scattered, often abandoned for lack of fuel or parts. The crude American boxes on tracks had outlasted their sophisticated German counterparts, not through superior engineering, but through superior system design. The victory wasn't technical, it was philosophical. The Americans understood that winning modern war required unglamorous virtues: reliability, maintainability, producibility. These weren't exciting qualities. They didn't inspire propaganda posters or stirring speeches, but they won campaigns. Looking back from the present day, the M3 half-track seems like an artifact from another era. We've moved far beyond the concept of lightly armoured personnel carriers with open tops. Modern equivalents are fully enclosed, heavily armoured, fitted with sophisticated electronics and weapons systems. The M113 that replaced the half-track in the 1960s was itself replaced by the Bradley and Stryker. But the fundamental lesson remains valid. The best weapon system isn't necessarily the most advanced. It's the one that best fits the entire operational context: production capacity, logistics infrastructure, maintenance doctrine, crew training, tactical employment. All of these factors matter as much as raw performance specifications. The Germans learned this lesson too late. By the time their officers fully understood what they faced, the industrial and logistical advantages of the Allies were insurmountable. The half-track was just one visible symbol of a deeper reality. America's ability to produce, supply, and maintain equipment at scales Germany couldn't match. The 60-day campaign from Operation Cobra through September 1944 stands as testimony to what mechanized infantry could achieve when properly equipped and supported. 40,000 half-tracks, thousands of crews, millions of miles travelled. Not glamorous, not technically impressive by German standards, but utterly, devastatingly effective. And the German officers who'd laughed in 1942 at crude American designs, by late 1944, those still alive had stopped laughing. They'd seen their Western Front collapse, watched their armies retreat in disorder, witnessed the overwhelming material superiority of forces that shouldn't have been able to match German tactical excellence. One last German assessment, found in archives after the war, captures the transformation in thinking. Written in October 1944 by a Wehrmacht General Staff officer, it analysed the collapse of German forces in France. The report didn't focus on tactical failures or strategic mistakes. It focused on a single, damning reality. We believed quality would triumph over quantity. We were wrong. The Americans have proven that sufficient quantity, properly employed and logistically supported, creates its own form of quality. Their half-tracks are inferior to ours in every individual measure, but they have 40,000. We have remnants. In modern war, industrial capacity is as decisive as battlefield courage. We failed to understand this truth until too late. The crude boxes on tracks had won, not through excellence, through presence, through numbers, through the unglamorous, relentless grinding of total war waged by an industrial superpower that understood the game it was playing. 41,000 half-tracks, 60 days across France, and a lesson in military effectiveness that resonates to this day. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.